Recording in progress.
The lag of the recording allows me to get a little room tone, though. For those out there wanting to get a little inside the sound industry, right, and the sound engineering part of it, get a little room tone first, guys. You can use that to edit out the background noise with the noise reduction setting on most of your DAWs, which stands for a digital audio something. Anyway, I almost got it. I just forgot what the W stood for. Oh, Sharon, this is exciting. We had to hit record because we were starting to broach into our subject. We got so excited.
So many things, all the things.
Oh, it's been a little while, and we're here. Obviously, we're going to talk about She-Hulk, and it's been a little while since you and I have talked. How have you been?
Yeah. Well, it's been wacky, and I mean, and it's going to be funny. I think it's one of those almost like the summer break is coming to an end because now there's all these things. So like we'll talk about Black Panther in less than 2 weeks, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's coming up.
But no, it's been interesting. I was, and the part of the reason why we even had some issues connecting is I was speaking at a tech conference in Toronto, and that was nice because it was one of those yay peopling events. And then it was also one of those things because it was so many folks from the different aspects of tech industry, cybersecurity, this kind of stuff. Let's just say that the conference hall was filled with, I would say, consistently a higher than normal statistical average of neurodivergence.
They've done studies about that. They've done studies in the tech industry about that. Actually. Yeah.
Oh, this is it. And it was interesting because using the superhero model that I do, which again, I will admit, like some of them, the gentleman that introduced me from Orion, like basically said, as he was introducing it, I think this is the first time I've ever said the word superheroes on stage. And it was like, don't worry, first time for everything, Dave. Yeah. It's okay. And it was wonderful. There was a great response. There was a lot of aha moments. And now I'm following up with some folks from, across the country on doing more work with them. But there were a lot of oh my God, I work an entire community of Reed Richards. We're all Reed Richards. We are all some. So it was wonderful to be out there preaching the geek girl gospel of mental health and neurodivergence, and then came back, played catch up on some other stuff here, and then headed straight into our local con and did a couple of panels there. And for that one, I did cosplay. Because I had to bounce between a Ghostbusters outfit and whatever. I did Carol Danvers, but like Carol Danvers, baseball hat, 9-inch nails, shirt, leather jacket, and the wig. So then afterwards, to prevent having wig hair, did like I call her Captain Holtzman. So it was left the Carol wig, shades, and baseball cap on, but then put my flight suit on.
Nice.
And had an awesome picture with a local Bucky. So that just made my day.
Oh, that's really cool.
Also a really awesome variant too, and a really awesome Loki variant. So it was like all the nerding. So
that's awesome. I have always, I love to go to those things to witness a lot of cosplay. I am just not as good. Even at Halloween, I'm not as good at costumes, picking and doing and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm always very admirable. And I'm like, gee, I should learn how to do that. That'd be cool. So
no, my mom, like basically teaching me to sew at an early age and then getting into things like Rocky Horror and stuff like that. Like any opportunity for cosplay is, has always been there. And, my kids fell down that rabbit hole. And frankly, I created monsters in the sense that it was their level, their game was always right up there. So, but when your kid ends up going to grade 1 as Wolverine, and you're having to make sure that his little yellow suit, the claws are like not dangerous, but then to watch your granddaughter wear it to daycare later is like awesome. So I still have to do like a Wolvie X-23 like mashup for them, but not just like, not the street clothes version, like running through the woods kind of thing. It's I want to do full on, like we're going to go old school.
Get the yellow
stuff like that. Crack open the Lycra and then have my son complain about, pins and where I'm sticking them. So yay, morph suits. Morph suits have brought his sewing associated trauma levels down.
Yeah. Well, you know what's funny? We'll probably mention Wolverine just briefly in this as we're talking about She-Hulk. But I'll just throw it out there is there was the Easter egg that Wolverine is now maybe part somewhere of the MCU kicking around. It was just a news article on the side of her looking on the internet that said man in bar fight has claws or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's got it. I mean, everyone knows. So the question is that a one-off or is that going to be referenced? And it sure seems like it. It's one of those things.
I'm hoping the fact that she asked the question, you know, to Kevin was the sort of the confirmation.
When did the Epson coming in? I love the little thumbs up to the camera, like, yeah, guys, we're all in this together.
Yeah. We're all asking. This is the $64,000 question. It's not just you. So.
Well, I titled this, or I believe I'm going to title this episode like the terrorism of toxicity or something to do with toxicity, because this is fascinating to me because above all, one of the things I've heard a lot of people say is this is the MCU's like sitcom, or some people have called it the superhero Ally McBeal or whatever. And I think that sometimes when people are saying that, they're acting like, oh, it's this silly little show. But the really interesting thing is they take on a lot of issues with femininity, masculinity, toxic masculinity. And as we're going to get into today, as much as people like to label things, toxic masculinity, blah. Most of those people probably haven't made it to this podcast once they read the title. Don't know. However,
they self-selected themselves out. Yay.
But, and I have met people who are somewhere in the middles who are kind of like a guy maybe and even I met women before who were like, well, what about, strong males? And I say that in a little mocking tone. Sorry about that. Because it doesn't make as much sense to me personally. But one of the things that I think for those people who are maybe wondering about, do we showcase positive masculinity? Well, yeah, actually, this show does, even for all the accusations people want to throw at it.
It gave you alternates. And I think that was the part that I found interesting was watching how there was a certain amount of, I would say, I would call it cherry picking from the folks that, like to throw woke out there as a derogatory.
Right.
Like,
now
sorry,
that
when I
no
hear
meaning.
woke, it's like, you just sound like you're worried that the world's going to leave you behind, that you're clutching onto your old values and, and so it was really interesting because that was exactly it. There was a contrast, and some of these folks that were, again, going down these rabbit holes were and saying how it was like picking on man. And it was just and even that, like you say, the use of the kinds of phrasing around, it's a sitcom, and kind of like writing it off. Like that was the other part too, is like it was used dismissively as opposed to no, like if you know anything about She-Hulk. I mean, good Lord, all it takes is like, even just if you know nothing else, go to the Wikipedia page, for God's sake. Like that in and of itself will give you like the quickie thing where it's this was satire, and it was satirizing comics. It was satirizing. And so, so many different things. It was making the social commentary, and that's where the fourth wall stuff came in. And again, fourth wall that predates Deadpool. Can we just put that out there once and for all? If you love that Deadpool does it, do not complain that She-Hulk is doing it, because she did it first. Okay. Just get over yourself. Yeah. Let's just go to some basic historical facts. But yeah, there's that weird dismissive thing. And it was really funny because, I mean, put it this way, my greatest frustration with the show, honestly, was the fact that the episodes were so short. The fact that there was clearly the issue of like, Marvel and what they do to their visual effects subcontractors being played out, but the fact that got referenced within it was, again, very She-Hulk. And that was really it, was that there just, to me, there wasn't enough, and there wasn't enough fourth wall stuff where they built up to it, and you really didn't get to what I would consider like the true fourth wall stuff until she comes through the screen later. and, moves through. So the talking off to the side, I mean, it was good. And maybe you have to baby step it in. So for me, it was more just a case of I wanted more. Mm-hmm. So if my only critique is that I wanted more and I wanted them to supersize it and do, I don't consider that a bad thing, in the sense that they do have a lot of balls that they're juggling. How the MCU has grown and the number of different things now that they are on so many different platforms. It's did this take a hit as a result? And I hate to say it, but I also wonder too, as much as they put it out there and they clearly fed into, this is the garbage that we've already put up with Captain America, with Ms. Marvel, what's happened, in terms of how people have literally turned on Scarlet Witch, all these other kinds of things that they knew in a sense they were poking the bear. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, okay, let's just see what happens here. Yeah. And maybe, do a tester size.
I'm going to, and I'll put this out there right up front. I'm going to assume, so if anyone's listening, if you feel a little tickle or whatever, mostly I'm going to assume that we're not really talking, when we talk about the really toxic fans, unless they're grudge listening, which I don't think I don't think I'm enough on the public, radar.
Yeah, we fly low enough on the radar.
So I don't think, I'm going to assume most of you listening out there are not that. Just so you know, if you're listening and don't feel attacked, but for those that are kind of maybe in the middle where they whatever you have feelings, I hope that you
sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly it. One of the things that is very fascinating is that She-Hulk and Deadpool, I think they're the only ones I know of off the top of my head. In the Marvel universe, even before the MCU, they're the only characters that know they are in comic books. They know that they're in a story, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that kind of awareness. And I saw a really, really interesting post in some group I was in after the final episode where someone, I hadn't even read it yet. So it was I hadn't seen the episode yet, rather. And so when I read the comment, I was like, oh, look away. Luckily, it wasn't a spoiler, but it said, hey, did She-Hulk just out Deadpool? And I was like, all right, I got to see this. And then how many of us were faked out when it goes to the Marvel screen or the Netflix and home screen and everything before she comes out? I was like, what happened? The TV kicked off for some, dang it, what's going on with this?
Yeah. Why am I getting my Marvel channels? But again, brilliant. And those little things. And even like you say, that little thing about Wolverine and is this an aside? Is it a real thing? Man in bar, with claws kind of thing. And I think that's the other part that a lot of people, again, if you weren't familiar with it, it was one of those things, again, I'm going to go down my weird academic path here, but it was intertextual and very postmodern. So it was very intertextual, postmodern in the day, like back in the 80s when it came out. And then the fact too, that she was like the queen of the guest spots, because as much as there were these different iterations, it was a case of she never got her own stuff with the same kind of regularity and consistency as everyone else. So it was always about integrating her into a storyline. So to have a running storyline about whose show is this anyways, was interesting, because again, she was the perennial guest. And then also too, even things like, I guess it's the third episode, and it was, and you're watching again, these folks. And this is where, like you're saying about, who they are as far as toxicity. I think there's a lot of folks where, and it can even be well-intentioned folks where you don't realize what you've normalized in terms of broader societal toxicity or broader values or perceptions of within the MCU, for example. And then you say and do things and then go, oh, wait a minute. But it was it was the Megan Thee Stallion episode. And, what's this with all the guest spots? This is just some sort of fangirl, blah, 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 blah. And then it was like, I just like pulled out my, issue 3 where it shows her and Spidey hanging upside down. And I think it's something like, welcome to issue 3, like the obligatory celebrity, cameo. Yeah. I can't remember. I'm misquoting her cover line, but it was exactly that. And it's like, yeah. And they did that, fine. It wasn't Spidey, but it was Megan Thee Stallion. Again, they brought it into the era. And what was really interesting too, is watching people make comments about well, I don't know if this is supposed to be feminist. Like, why is she twerking? And what's all that about? And then you saw a lot of misogynoir about Megan Thee Stallion in terms of like, here's a Black artist and she's twerking. And so it just went down, like it just triggered a whole bunch of other troll behaviors. And so it was interesting because it was one of those things where it's like, yes, it's feminist. It's always been feminist. Yeah, but look at her back in the day. Well, I'm sorry, but if you were reading that and all you saw was a green woman with big boobs and didn't realize that those big boobs and her figure were there, in a sense, ironically, then I can tell that you weren't reading it for the real reasons, because as somebody in my late teens, early 20s that was reading that, it was like, yeah, she can be sexy, hot, awesome, but entirely in control and shutting down those things. So a lot of these things and clips that people were pointing out and going, well, it wasn't really feminist before, and you see it's still not feminist now, and da-da-da. And you're like, you have a limited, like, I get what you think you're saying. That was the phrase that I kept using, because what she was doing was she was critiquing it as well as saying, you know what, like, being a feminist doesn't mean you have to wear like sackcloth, no makeup. It's about informed choice. And it's about, are you participating in your own objectification, or are you taking something on in an empowering way? And that's a you thing.
That's really interesting. And this tells me a little what you're going to answer, I think, but I wanted to get your perspective. Of course, not being a woman, I don't have that perspective. I can only listen and kind of try to learn and watch. And, there were a lot of things that I saw and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That seems very empowering. What's more empowering for a fictional character than to be able to walk into the producer's office and say, hey, you have to listen to me, right? So, but I wanted to get your feedback on that, and we can even go not just the show, but back to the comics. And it sounds like this is probably a yes, but do you find She-Hulk to be an empowering character as a woman?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, and the fact that she was empowering, and again, a lot of people have a misunderstanding around feminism in terms of what it is, and they think that it's like, grumpy women that hate men, and it's like, no. And I just put that out there as a qualifier, and this may, again, some folks may go, oh, well, that's why. But I mean, my PhD is in gender and women's studies, and I taught this. So, okay, maybe I'm bringing a little bit, again, something to the table that, somebody might roll their eyes or whatever, but it's this idea that there's a lot of misunderstanding where, and I think it even feeds into other stuff when people get into why they get upset about, critical race theory. And what they think is that they're afraid of it because this is how, dominant society is treated this group of people. And oh my God, if feminists or people with critical race theory, coming in to critique things are, if the pendulum swings, well, then they're going to treat us like crap. And it's like, no. It's about, these are ways of looking at the world that says nobody gets treated like crap, and that there are actually downsides for folks. So feminism and what She-Hulk embodies literally is this idea that nobody really has to suffer, that toxic masculinity actually takes its toll, not just on women, but it takes its toll on men because it limits your emotional intelligence growth, etc. It embeds insecurities and other things that ultimately lead to traumatizing behavior, everything from, sports team hazing to other other really sort of toxic jock related or other behaviors that pit men against men. But it's men on, where are you in the food chain? So in other words, if you are a male that is, not of the same socioeconomic and, classes like an Elon Musk, well, then you're automatically lower on the food chain. And if he treats you like crap, it's about how stuff rolls downhill. And so feminism is about, if you're going to work on equity, start with the 51% of the population that in some way, shape, or form is on the short end of the stick, obviously some more than others. So you recognize your privilege. But if you tackle that 51%, then you can actually solve a lot of the other problems along the way. Mm-hmm. So it's not about, it's about actually making things better for for men too, but it's that idea that you have to check your privilege and check and see where you could, again, where men are participating in their own oppression. So, and then women buy into it as well. So there were a lot of folks for whom some people go, well, the fact that she's partially dressed or the fact that she's twerking, that's inherently, objectifying and sexist. And you're like, that's a social value. Some people feel empowered with less clothes on, and some people feel empowered with more. Like do I want to wear a bikini or a hijab? If I'm wearing it for my own business and not because somebody's making me do it to keep me in my place, I'm wearing it for me. And therefore, that's empowering.
It's interesting as you say that. It reminds me of the scenes in Miss Marvel where her friend asks her at one point, does it bother you that I wear the hijab? And, there's a reference to that. And you can see her when she's trying on her costume and thinking of her mother's concerns. She kind of ties that scarf around her waist. It's a little tight fitting. It's not quite her style. She's making that choice from her, and it's from her cultural experience, right? And it is presented in a very interesting way to where I feel like they're not making fun of her choosing the more modest approach, whereas they're also not making fun of She-Hulk for taking like, hey, look at me in this dress, kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and there was a whole thing around Jen and clothing because of the fact, I still remember, Bruce with the, who's your best friend? What's your best friend? Like, spandex, lycra, like this is your, as a guy that's woken up, with my pants stretched out and basically naked as a result, you're going to embrace stretchy fabric. But you saw her walking in those boxy suits and people commenting on her clothing. And it's like, she's like, right. I'm trying to be functional because if I need to Hulk out, this suit needs to have enough bulk and enough stretch that I can wear it both as Jen and as She-Hulk. And then again, it gave you the social commentary on how women are judged by their clothing, coupled with then it also gave you the plot point to take you to the designer and other things. And I love that the fact that they used Daredevil for that, not just because it was cool having Matt Murdock in and all that other stuff, but people going, how come she doesn't have a costume yet? Like, we're at episode 11, we still don't understand. Like, did you not watch Daredevil?
It was the whole first season before he had a costume.
Like, dude was fighting in street clothes.
Yeah.
Like,
he had a bandana on his head the whole first season.
This is the part that was funny too, from like a cosplay this weekend thing. So that was fine. I'm doing stuff with my local Ghostbusters group, and we've got our booth set up raising money for the Children's Hospital Foundation. And then it was like, but I have all these other things that I need to fit in. So I had like my mental health panels, and it was like, how do I fit in something there in cosplay? Okay, fine, put the Carol Danvers stuff on and then do the Danvers mashup. But then I also had a Halloween party at a friend's place, and like I cracked open my Elektra outfit from 2007. and so a friend of mine who's from my Dungeons and Dragons group, because that was who was hosting the party, was somebody from the D&D group. But he was like, I'll wear my Daredevil outfit. And it was funny because it was a first season Daredevil outfit. So it was him like in the black pants, the black shirt, the piece of fabric, the bamboo sticks. And but it was perfect and completely like screen accurate in its authenticity as street clothes.
Well, one of the things, as you mentioned this, that hits is the message of a double standard. And I thought that was very effective, the way they utilized the She-Hulkness of, you're hired, but you have to be She-Hulk when you're working during working hours, right?
Yeah. And then
she even says at some point, I don't remember the exact line, but I remember it delivered in a way that was very meaningful, where she says, wow, I feel like She-Hulk was hired, not me, or I'm only hired because I have superpowers. And I'm also a good lawyer, for crying out loud. But nobody's really saying that. And then everybody thinks that it has nothing to do with my career, right? Which is incredibly frustrating. But I felt like, that is a really good description. Oh, you're just the token woman. Oh, you're just the one who, or you're just got this job because you're a woman. Or I literally saw someone just yesterday on Facebook who said, who made a comment that movies get packed with women because then if you complain, then they can say you're sexist. And I was like, do you really? So you believe that female-driven movies, what they created the whole movie for it, or they only brought them in because, and I guess what I'm trying to say is it's like, think it through, if you're trying to think it through a little, because we don't say that, when we're watching something else.
Well, and you see, and that's
Tony Stark, for example.
And that was the other part that was interesting too, because that was exactly the kind of stuff that I was seeing coming up in some of the Marvel fan groups that I'm in, where it's this weird thing where there's this they're just trying to broaden the tent and bring everybody in as this big money making thing. They want to have as many new people in, and as a result, they're watering down the franchise. And again, it's the if you like Daredevil, then hold on. She-Hulk was there first, just because they introduced, had film content of Daredevil, of Deadpool first, doesn't mean that it wasn't there. And again, that's the other part. So it's this, yes, they're broadening things out. Yes, it is going to open stuff up, but it's not like they manufactured this character last week based on whatever, and then inserted it in going, we need women. It's like these characters have been around. The most recent, and newly created, and it's still got close to 10 years old anyways, is Miss Marvel. And so it's like, this is stuff that's been around.
And that was a huge... And things are changing.
So it's not being watered down. Yes, they are trying, they realized, again, in the same way that women were reading comics, that women are going to the movies, and that maybe, we would like to have some representation. Yeah. And so it's not negative, but it's really weird, because then they also use that as I'm not being a misogynist. I'm not being this and that, because I'm just like, this is about lack of character development. Oh, it's about this plot hole. And you're like, really? Because I'm not claiming, I'm not crapping on the MCU, but there have been other little plot holes here, there, and whatever in other movies. And I've never seen you crap on like Thor: Dark World the way you're taking a dump on this thing right now.
Yeah, so, no, not the same
and again,
way. Right.
Like it's one of those things where, and don't get me wrong, I love watching Thor: Dark World, but when I see it in the body of work, to me, it's the one that they maybe tried to either do too much or they didn't do whatever. Again,
well, it's like I say, kind of thinking it through enough to say, if I'm saying the very predictable thing that people say that sexists say, I'm going to get accused of being a sexist, especially if I say it every single time. Same thing with race and all those things. If it's like, oh, you're saying that predictable thing that, I can't remember the actor's name, but once again, yesterday I read about Wonder Man being cast. And black man playing Wonder Man. Oh, and people are like, oh no, they changed his race. And I'm like, nobody knows who Wonder Man is. Now, there are some deep dive people who read the comics, but he's a very obscure character for one thing. And for another thing, who cares anyway? It shouldn't have to be that way in order to there's no need for justification. And it's not even a character nobody cares about Wonder Man #1. And now they will, hopefully, when they bring him to the screen and they make him a cool character. But, those concerns, it's like, if you parrot the same exact concerns that people who are accused of that being, well, at the very least, you're going to be accused of that because you're saying the things they say. And I feel like one of the things that's a strength of the show that we're talking about is they actually pulled a trigger on her acting empowered, speaking her mind, even, and this is where a lot of shows will break down, they even give her autonomy and agency when it comes to her dating, romantic, and sex life.
Yes.
And this double standard that's come in where I'm seeing people being like, whoa, there's all this sex in this Marvel movie. And it's like, we've never, because people make a big deal, like the scene in the Eternals where they kiss and then it flashes forward, which, by the way, this is pretty much a kiss and then flash forward. If anyone wants to
exactly.
make it sound
always,
like it's really...
it's the lead up and then it's the next morning. Or
they
went
into the room together,
Yeah.
And anyway, so you definitely can't say that it's inappropriate or exploitive that way, in my opinion. But anybody who doesn't say Tony Stark and Star-Lord, and then says She-Hulk when they're accusing of, boy, too much sexual acting out. It's like,
have you seen Iron Man? The first Iron Man movie? Have you seen the first Guardians of the Galaxy?
Guardians, even, the second Guardian, anything with Star-Lord, except for Endgame, in which he was barely a character. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
yeah, exactly. But it's that double standard of wait a second, like it was the locker room pat on the back, wild playboy.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, you realize this is the beginning of their story where they're at their most toxic, right? This is them before the growth arc.
Yes, exactly. That's them, and we think of where they ended up, and nobody really. Well, that's Tony Stark's character. Well, this is She-Hulk's character. Yeah. And even in Guardians 2 at Yondu's funeral, Peter is making the comment to say, I really admire him. He was my real dad. And also he hooked up with all these hot chicks, right? And now, so if you're not going to have a big issue with that line, that's fine. But if you are not going to have an issue with that line and then you're going to complain, the thing that hit me was, she's dating and she's on like Tinder and those things. But the interesting thing is with the She-Hulk, in the context of the show, she's looking for someone to spend time with. I mean, you might even say looking for a relationship.
Well, this is, and that's the difference that what these guys were engaged in were actually unhealthy relationships and flings and whatnot. So these were all things so they're getting pats on the back for effectively, again, really toxic, unhealthy behaviors, both for themselves and others. And again, just again, in terms of how they view themselves. In other words, I'm going to basically go through women like Kleenex because if I was to do anything else, that would either smack of effort, or I'm actually so insecure that I couldn't be expected to do that. Of course, I'm not going to say it that way because that would reveal a weakness. Instead, I'm just going to be a womanizer. And so there's a whole other thing about a facade. And again, that toxic masculinity thing of, well, I better come off as a player and embody the role of a player because it's better than saying that I am emotionally stunted and incapable of a relationship. And again, you might even be gaslighting yourself to feel that you're just, nobody can handle me. Whereas she was actually engaging in healthy things and then having toxic men come into her life. And so you see her going through these different things. And there were people making comments about how, I heard the S word out there. Oh, she's a slut, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, no, this is what women go through, where you get emotionally, you get manipulated and somebody acts like the good guy until, and then whatever. So to actually, and you see, and that was the other part too, with having Matt come in, was because Matt's had his own issues. And this was literally about how, based on the variety of insecurities and other different things going on in their lives, they ended up engaging in relationships that, again, in her case, she's trying to find somebody, but keeps, getting sucked in by these toxic folks, regardless of whose face she's putting on the profile. And then with him, it was the same thing where he's processing so much. He wasn't capable of relationships and kind of getting into them for the wrong reasons. And they literally never found their equals before.
Yeah.
And then there they were in the courtroom and they literally, sparks flew on a number of levels and they found their equals. And then later when it's her client, and that whole thing, again, they find their themselves as equals on another front. So the two of them together, make so much sense. And the fact that they had him doing the walk of shame and then showing up to the barbecue was just,
carrying his shoes. I love that.
Yeah.
And the barbecue, to me, there's two things that are interesting there. Now, I'm not going to say, I don't want to say it has to be this way, but I thought the interesting thing when people want to throw around, oh, she's a slut because she had sex or whatever, multiple dates with what's his name, for one thing. Now, once again, I'm not saying everybody has to do whatever. And then once again, was that there was a genuine, we enjoy each other with Matt Murdock, and he comes to the barbecue meaning, let's see what happens. There's some kind of let's see what happens, enjoying each other. Certainly not just a sexual contact, right? It's something where, yeah, you can see this like kind of match between them. The other thing, which I thought was a strength that existed also in Captain Marvel, and existed in this, at least through those interactions with Daredevil, and the same with Carol Danvers and Nick Fury, is I never got a whiff of either of them feeling insecure or less than the other person. And, so for, and with Daredevil and She-Hulk, there's a little back and forth of like, all right, I'm going to do my famous hallway fight with these dudes. And she's like, nah, I just smashed him. Yeah. I'm a Hulk. So you got a Hulk with you, dude. But then his reaction is just kind of like, there's a frustration, but there's a teasing factor to it. And he's not
like, I've been at this a little bit longer, but it's not condescending. It's more just like, I get your enthusiasm. I've been there. Let's just see how it all plays out. And then you see how it plays out. It's like, it is a little from column A, a little from column B. Like, she saved him, 40 minutes or something? Yeah. And at the same time, the realtor's going to have a hard time putting that building back on the market.
Nobody they didn't charge her for any of that, but yet we'll see if there's a season 2. And if they do, I think that, even the fact that Charlie Cox, playing Matt Murdock, doing like you say, the traditional walk of shame, carrying his shoes, that is traditionally a shot on a female character who always is the one leaving the scene, and everyone's like, oh, and for him to do that past that woman. Now, he didn't show any sign of shame, but
but it was just the idea that like, here it is daylight, and I got to walk down the street in my costume, and my shoes might not be comfortable, but damn, I'm putting the mask on so that nobody knows who I am.
Right.
And the fact that then Nikki points it out, like, there's some guy, and so it's not just the once-off shot. There's like the reminder, like it's called out for what it is, just in case anybody's wondering. But yeah, exactly. It's not the woman leaving the guy's place. So they flipped a lot of those things on their head.
Yeah.
And it was great. And the fact that he was, he did that and there was like no harm, no foul. It wasn't like he never saw her again or whatever else. Like I think there were so many things that were done maturely here, but again, it's this, it's a comedy, and it's this, and it's that. And so there's still these things that get labeled and the labels taken with a certain value. Like, I love the fact that it was, clearly labeled as a comedy. And a lot of I think they call it like a courtroom or a lawyer drama type, whatever. And again, the Ally McBeal references, because again, those things were there's this weird thing where it's like, apparently on one level, you can't make social commentary in these particular forums. And yet we know that how much good social commentary comes out of everything from a stand-up routine, a Simpsons episode, something like comedy is often used as the vehicle because it allows somebody to make the poke and do the thing where you're not like, again, where you can laugh about it and do the, I mean, good Lord, George Carlin as somebody from back in the day that I think of in my childhood, that, the amount of social commentary that he made.
Unabashed and unapologetic and not even hidden. I think if people want to say a comedy does not do that, then one of the problems is they're trying
to listening to?
Well, also, and also they're trying to have it both ways, because most of the people who are going to endorse that are also going to say it's a comedian's job to disrupt the system. If the comedian is making jokes that are in the vein that they enjoy, if they're busting on trans people or they're, doing those things, then people are quick to say, well, they're comedians, they're supposed to shake it up. And then it's like, well, this comedy needs to stop preaching to me. It's like, well, dude, and I say dude in a meaningful way. Anyway, but one of the things that, let's get into this now since we're talking about Matt Murdock, and I think he'd be on this list. There are, as I said, there are some strong male characters, and you know how you and I are always hashtagging not all men. No, just kidding. That's usually thought of as a rather toxic hashtag. Toxic hashtag might be redundant now for Twitter. Whoa, we'll see. That's ripped from the headlines. But, they have these examples of good male characters. They're not, and they don't have to be perfect to be non-toxic. I mean, for example,
and in some cases, it's the wake up call to the fact that they may be carrying some toxicity. Like that's actually where it's not just about being Mr. Rogers, Steve, or like neighborhood sweater guy.
They were usually seen together most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I still love, I don't know if you've seen the meme about, again, in terms of multiverses and timelines, where that's exactly what he did was he went back and, it's not just about him and Peggy, or is that really Peggy?
Does older Fred Rogers kind of look like older Steve Rogers?
Yeah. So, but seeing even seeing like Pug was a good example. And again, Pug wasn't perfect, but the fact but you saw that there was progress, because when he's got to go in there with the earpiece and like be prompted by Nikki to say the right things, because, the invitation said, bro, oh crap, I got to send a guy. And it was one of those things where he's like, hey, I don't know how to be a dick.
Yeah. Well, and the best exchange as part of that was when she's telling him, now make sure whenever you mention women, you say the word female. And he just, his visceral revulsion when he was just like, oh, please don't make me do this. And she's like, no. And also the fact that he was standing up for, different causes throughout. And he's able to identify with that one partner, I don't remember his name, from the DA's office, that was like totally just a jerk.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, I don't have any use for that guy or for really any of these guys. I'm not threatened by the strong women in my life. I'm not needing to compensate.
Yeah.
Even this goes in the line of the non-perfect thing. Even cousin Larry, who was her dad,
oh my God, he was such an awesome dad.
Yes, yeah.
Like, it was just like, again, but in that weird kind of like, he didn't quite realize how some of the stuff was like literally to dad, but it was coming from the good place of like protecting his daughter. So it's like, you can move home and
Exactly. Is it infantilizing? Well, yeah, but it's apparent infantilizing. And so yes, it is something maybe not perfect, but it's the kind of thing that people would do for their kid.
He was awesome. And I think another good example of that sort of that good man thing came right in the very first episode with Bruce. And that whole thing where, it's so I got to teach you how to Hulk. And of course he's got the binder. Oh my God. And he's got it all mapped out. And then the idea about the controlling the anger and all these kinds of things. And it's like, she's like, no, I do this already. And again, a lot of folks, God, that was like the first thing that triggered stuff. Oh, so she just thinks she's a better Hulk. And she's rattling off all these things. And then they started dragging in stuff that's never been addressed in the MCU in terms of his own origin and his family and trauma and whatnot. And that's the same as the fact that she deals with this. And it's like, you don't understand the notion of microaggressions and complex PTSD and all these other things. So you're trying to play the pain Olympics right now, as opposed to this is the aha moment where I swear every woman at some point went, yep, that's just a Tuesday.
You know what hit me about that was very interesting was I felt like in the previews, I didn't love the previews for this show, to be honest.
No,
especially the first ones.
They didn't do enough, or I don't know what they were using, or extra footage, something.
Well, yeah, and to me, all it looked like was her in a dress, and people saying, "Hey, look at that ass," or whatever, and it was like, okay, I don't know about that. And that aspect of She-Hulk was like, if that's the only thing they're doing. But the interesting thing about that bit where she says, "I'm used to controlling emotion. I'm a woman." In the trailer, hit me as a joke, like she was saying, like, women, we'd be crazy. That's what I thought. But when I see it in the context of the episode, I was like, that's a fascinating thing. And probably one of those things that, like you said, women are like, yep, thank you. And men are probably like, oh, I mean, maybe I knew that. Maybe I didn't know that. But it's an interesting way. And this is one of the things I think comedy also allows us, because our guard is down, we're relaxed, we're laughing, and we can listen. This was my big argument with people about Jojo Rabbit, by the way. People were like, oh, you shouldn't make fun of Nazis. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, make fun of Nazis.
But again, when the Jews writing the film and making the joke about it, that's
right.
like, that's different.
That's
like, you know,
different, right.
And it's people useful. Forget that J.K. also has Cohen in his last name. And so he is coming at it from like, he chooses to use one last name rather than the other, but he's a Cohen as well. So, you know, like if he's making that joke, that's a little different because it's actually coming from that insightful place and the absurdity. And so this was exactly it, was that what she did was, and again, goes to this, like, Bruce is not toxic, but he's also a man that can grow. And here I'm trying to help my cousin. And oh God, she's just pointed out that I'm mansplaining.
Right. And that's uncomfortable.
That's not my, and that's, I think, the other part, that it wasn't tearing down Bruce. It wasn't picking on Bruce. It was that thing where it's like, as with all allies in any way, shape, or form, that room for growth and recognizing. So yes, he's the superhero. Yes, he's this, he's got this experience, but he's also a guy. So when his cousin becomes a Hulk too, for all the lived experience he's gotten, that he doesn't have the lived experience of being a woman. So therefore, he doesn't know what other stuff she's carrying around. And that, in a sense, makes her already, have to do that, because you do have to do that. That's everything from, again, the various microaggressions that you can literally be dealing with from the moment you wake up, where suddenly you're again, everybody gets up and starts getting ready for school and work. You're supposed to remember where absolutely everything is. It's the mom, where did I leave this? Mom, like, why am I the memory bank and the inventory holder for everything in the house, especially when I wasn't the last person to touch and or see this? So I've got to do the extra things here, or I've got to do the preemptive stuff. Then it's the getting to work, and you get there and so makes this comment, or somebody makes a comment about, gee, your hair looks a little different, or a little whatever, or, are you tired? Or, some kind of weird comment about, what you're wearing, or again, these other weird little things that they're just sadly this normal part of your day. Or you're going to get coffee and like the weirdo behind you, and you got to brush him off or say a thing. And in a sense, act passively or act politely, because it's I need to defuse and get out. Mm-hmm. Because if I do this other thing, and handle this, maybe, why didn't you just blah, blah, blah? The guy says, first of all, he's not going to say that to you. Second of all, even if he did, and you did that, well, then you're a guy standing up doing it. I'm suddenly the bitch, and I've just thrown gas on the fire. So so it was one of those things where when you look at who Bruce Banner is and how otherwise emotionally intelligent he is, especially since having gone, and that's the other part too. He's always been emotionally intelligent, even when he was in his worst Hulk days. But it was the fact that, and what he didn't like was the fact that a switch flipped and he would lose all of that. So that was where the loss was that I'm devolving, and I don't like who this other guy is. And so that was his struggle, where she's like, no, I gotta do this two-step all the time. So in some respects, it reflects back to his earlier line where he says, I'm always angry. Mm-hmm. It was actually a nod there.
Oh, interesting. I didn't catch it. Yeah.
I got the first or second movie, and it was it was about I'm always angry. Well, she's like, I'm always on. So as a woman, that was brilliant. But it did that thing where you're like, he's the nice guy. And it was the same thing with Abomination too. In terms of nice guys, honestly, Abomination, you find out in some respects is a nice guy. Wong, there's a whole other,
Absolutely.
We need we need Wongers with his own show.
And you know what happened? And Emil, I think, Abomination, he's he's an interesting case. Before we go into him, I wanted to mention, though, I think the best example of non-toxic positive masculinity, which is the therapy group. And you've got all these B and C, probably C and D level, actually, Marvel villains who are having this changing experience. And one of the things there is first of all, they did what Bruce learned to do, which is they listened. right? It's like you can say all the things and yeah, Bruce is trying to help, but he didn't listen. And so they offer this listening, and you even have very interesting, even though they bury it in a joke, someone's like, yeah, let's go kill him. And it's like, they're all supervillains, right? So no big deal. Let's just find him and kill him. And then one of them, gosh, I can't even remember which one, chimes in to say, hey guys, can we offer her something more than just violence? Like, oh, we'd love to kill him. And isn't that just a male reaction? Someone hurt you, you tell me his name. Where does he live? Exactly. And it's like, oh, well, actually, I just need somebody to like listen and comfort me. And I'm a whole human being, adult in my own right. And by the way, I'm a Hulk. If he needs killing, no, she didn't say that. But if she's up to the task,
you don't need to defend me. I can physically do whatever needs to be done.
Exactly. Right. But then to have one of them point out, hey guys, this is well intentioned, but it's off the mark. And to me,
it won't do any of us any good. It's the stepping back. Well, and that was the whole other part too. The fact that he came to this, and at first you see it being played in a jokey kind of way, and like especially the fact that it's the over the top. He's got all these, again, and it plays into the whole
his hippie harem or whatever,
and the whatever. So there's definitely, it is sort of poking fun at a certain thing, but at the same time, like this is the first group of people in some respects that, again, despite the chaos that gets introduced into her life, it's like, oh, here's the proverbial safe space. Like it's this little peer-led group. And that was the other part. So that you're like, okay, so there's this whole world of superheroes that, in a sense, yes, they've worked through it, but they don't sit down and have this kind of a conversation where, like you say, it's that C and D tier that find themselves, sitting in this place. And then the flip of it being the place where Todd has the event and Emil's just like, hey, you know what? I'm just trying to do speaking gigs to pay the bills, man. Like, I just got to do what I got to do. And da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, oh, you mean it's this? Hold on. These are like that. But again, that thing where from the nice guy perspective, it's that whole thing where somebody says, well, why are you friends with so-and-so? Or why did I, whatever. And it's like, well, that's just my buddy from like my, my hockey team or whatever. And you're like, yeah, but, and so he had that same realization where it's like his Venn diagram of friends that he thought, or associates or whatever it was, literally loop back into something toxic. And that's not where he wanted to be, but he didn't know until it was pointed out to him. It's like, I was just doing my thing and I was just whatever. And hey, it's a speaking gig. Oh, it's a speaking gig for who?
Well,
this is not cool. This goes against my values.
I wanted to know what you thought like about that character. Cause at first I was like, oh, he's the ringleader. And then it's like what you were meant to think, I think. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, oh no, he's just speaking. And then it's like, yeah, but he's, as you put it, kind of by speaking, he's perpetuating the problem. Right.
Well, and again, he was coming at it a particular way. And I could say like one thing the pandemic did save me from was that I got booked into a gig that seemed a particular way and that who I would be speaking with and blah, blah, blah seemed fine. And then it was as the pandemic kicked in and some of these folks that I was going to be sharing the stage with were suddenly talking about 5G and, some other stuff. And you're like, oh, I get it. You believe in certain things related to neuroscience that we share values in, but then there's other parts of science that you kind of, self-select yourself out of. And I have a problem with that. So I kind of see it that same way where it was like he knew a certain amount about the gig, but not enough. And then exactly caught himself with the, oh my God, I'm actually perpetuating a thing that I don't believe in. And so again, how often do you walk into something? Oh, well, my friend so-and-so, my son had a funny thing happen where a buddy of his that they used to work together. And it was like, yeah, I got this email for this thing and there's going to be free pizza. And what they found out was they'd ended up at the local headquarters of a provincial political party. And that, there was pizza there, but they were supposed to be making phone calls on behalf of this political party to earn their pizza. And it was just like the awkward.
I had an experience a while back. It was very interesting. And this is what I like to throw this out there because I know people and I've met people who, even some well-intentioned people that are like, well, what about like a these men's groups, and some of them are like men's rights and be a strong man and be a king and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to say that I haven't been to all the groups in the world, right? I will say, however, this is the example of what I've usually experienced as a man. When their guard is down, other men say things, right? But I had an experience once. I found a group on Facebook that was all about male sexual abuse survivors. And so I decided I was very interested in that. And I was like, and particularly for this show, I reached out to the guy who was in charge of it. And I said, I'd love to talk to you and maybe even talk to you about being on this podcast, because this is a very underappreciated problem. It's not talked about enough. Men don't talk about it enough, especially in their own experiences, that kind of thing. Also very underreported because of shame and masculinity. Once again,
and that's what masculinity and patriarchy do, is they shame men for this stuff.
And the interesting thing was, it was a great response at first. But then as we traded messages back and forth, it wasn't very long. It wasn't very many exchanges before he started talking about how this is perpetuated by women, and women are the ones who block us from being able to report. And, modern women and feminism and all this has been such a blight, and it's made it so, and all of a sudden he went there. And that's the problem, is when I've approached a lot of groups that say they focus on men's mental health or anything else about masculinity, some of them are really, I'm sure, once again, there's some, and I have some friends that are part of some groups that, but the interesting thing is the groups address toxic masculinity. They talk about being male. That's that could go in a healthy direction. If they're talking about women did this to us, and by the way, women
this
suck.
is a result of feminism.
And it's like, where did the anger have to come in if we're talking about, healing from abuse? Why does it have to be? Why do we have to be angry at women also? And why does that have to rear its head within the first conversation that we had? Which I was grateful, because then I didn't spend time recording, which I would not have.
Self-selecting yourself out,
I wouldn't have felt comfortable putting that out there, because I feel like also it's not true. I mean, I'm going to compare something really serious to something that, well, it's serious to those who work in the industry and those of us who are fans. But either way, if people want to say, oh, well, women abuse boys and men, it's like, that's never happened. But statistically speaking, the vast majority of abusers are men. We all know that. And then on the other hand,
more men are abused by other men than they are by women.
Exactly. And the other thing, this won't sound near as serious, is the same thing in the Marvel. You step into the Marvel comic superhero world, and I hear people say, they just repeat it. And it's an easy Google to prove wrong. They say it's all the wokeness is really destroying the comics industry. Nobody's buying comics anymore. And it's like, they have never sold more comics than they have.
Yeah.
There was a 20. It was like a 20.
Do you think the industry's going down and that Marvel's down to their last 2 pennies?
Last year was, exactly. Last year, I read this recently that last year there was a jump of like 20 or 25%. Or it was 2 years ago there was that. And then last year it was a jump of 50% on top of that, or something huge.
Some kind of crazy, stupid number where it's like, again, nobody's sitting there starving kind of thing in the Marvel head office.
And that's the thing that I think people forget, is it's easy we focus on the toxicity of it all. But then also I like to look at the other side to say, when I see a toxic comment now on social media, I see a lot more people standing up against it than I ever used to. Right? And you mentioned, Miss Marvel 10 years ago, right? It's like a decade old of her lore and everything, but it was a phenomenal seller and became almost an instant classic comic work. As soon as the issues came out and they were bundled into the book that, they usually do. And even before then, people were appreciating it and saying, oh, this is huge. So
it was filling a need. There was clearly an audience. No, and that's the part that I find funny, is when there are these kind of things where people will either cherry pick and misrepresent something because it goes against their perception of the fandom, because there's this weird fear of how the fandom might grow. And I think, like I said, the part that got me with a lot of these groups, and mentioned this to you before, which is why we had to press record, the part of this rabbit hole, was, you're in this fan group and they're talking about, and you're watching the stuff And especially considering the fact that She-Hulk took this on. Like we've dealt with all of this stuff, and She-Hulk's going to do what she's always done. But we're also going to, in terms of that modernizing, in the same way we're bringing in Megan Thee Stallion for the 3rd episode, instead of it being Spidey for the 3rd issue, as your celebrity thing, and dealing with the social media stuff. So it did that stuff, and it called it out, and it called out the Tinder stuff and all these other. So it went and modernized that way. And then you watched basically the folks who were contributing to this stuff get triggered, and just like, it was like a textbook. And I know I'm this, but da 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 da, and and it was this bizarre thing where you're like, dude, like, just stop now, because you've moved clearly from steps 1 through 4, like clockwork, and just different things where it was everything from the redirects, the whatever. And it was interesting because you would watch folks step up. And what was really nice was that it's one thing, and because you would have these comments, and if as a woman you stepped up and said something, you would just, the doubling down was ridiculous. A guy would say something, and unless there were other women to pick on, they might get attacked. Especially if this is somebody that 2 people have an ongoing whatever. But for the most part, they could say something and they would get ignored if there was a woman to pick on instead. And then women, and so you had women watching each other's back and making certain kinds of comments, but you did have more men stepping in. And then you just had a lot of times, as this was going further and further, where it was just like, somebody's toxic post would go up, and it's like, some guy going, really? Could we just could you just stop this? Mm-hmm. Or, gee, where's the is the admin not paying attention? Like, what's the deal? And even some folks that started like a parallel, they literally posted and said, really tired of the toxicity over here. Yeah. And they actually said something to the effect of Marvel non-toxic fandom group. Because we want to celebrate things, and we're not above critiquing things if we think that there's a plot hole or questioning something, or could they have done it, but we're not going into this garbage anymore. So it was nice to see more guys stepping up and frankly saying things like, really, how insecure are you? Like, really, could you? And when it's nice when you're looking at somebody's profile and going, oh, look it's a 45-year-old man going, really, dude? You're going to mansplain that you're going to mansplain feminism to a woman. Okay. In the meantime, I had folks on that very same thread try to dox me. And pull out how dare you make comments like this because you work in mental health, and then they're putting up my profile picture and putting up other things. And it was like, right. Again, could you double down on the toxicity? So I think it was really bold for doing that and calling it out, because I think Marvel hasn't really been able to do that as an entity. So I think that was the other part that was interesting, was very much in that She-Hulk way of, I am aware that I am, in this case, in a show, or I am in a comic, and this is the world that I operate in. And so therefore I can make this social commentary. I can say and do things that the other shows can't. And so they did that. They went there, but they not only went there on the toxic fans, they also went there on Kevin with the whole, really, the CGI, really? Okay, so I have to do this off screen. Okay, so I need to be.
What's the best way to handle this? Should I do it off screen?
Because of the budget, and then asking the questions about the X-Men, whatever. So there was no issue around that, or even the fact that when you think about how She-Hulk's history is grounded in litigation issues. The fact that some of the first thing was people are like, well, what's the whole thing with Titania and da 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 da, and you're like, do you not realize if they're going to have a lawyer show, the idea of, first of all, a lawsuit around copyright as it relates to She-Hulk, but then the fact that Disney is known for being one of the most litigious entities regarding copyright, this is are you paying attention, or is this over your head? It's the no, this is all the stuff. And I'm just sad that I'm only getting 22 minutes of it.
Yes. So one of the things that I've had to learn is when you see something depicted in fiction like this, whether it's racism or sexism, and especially if it is created by people or a creative team who understands what that is and comes from that perspective, there are times where it's tempting to say, well, this seems a little heavy-handed. And I heard people say that about not Pug. Here's the problem, by the way. Pug and the guy who was the toxic dude from the DA's office.
Todd.
Hey, nothing against anybody getting a check. I don't want to recast anybody, but they both look too much alike. I couldn't tell the difference between them sometimes. But when people were saying like, "Oh, that dude's way over the top," right? And the thing is, mostly men, I felt like, said that, and not maliciously. Most of them. Mm-hmm. I'm talking people who are the woke libs of us or whatever, you know.
But again, these are, again, like everything else. There's a little element of caricature. Yeah. I mean, this is a superhero world, right? Everything's just up a notch, right?
But I have found the thing I learned is, I just assume it's not now when I hear things. And I read a book called The City We Became. It's a part of a trilogy. It's going to be part of a trilogy. The second one just came out this week. Anyway, by Nicole Jennings, I think. But it has a lot of stories about sexism and racism in it because all the characters are very diverse. It has to do with the soul of New York City and all this, and it's very, very good, I think. But it has, tale after tale of kind of misogyny and racism. And the thing is, I actually felt that way as I started reading it. And I was like, gee, this seems like over the top. I mean, just people, well, come on now. But one of the scenes is a woman in a park confronting a black man and one of the characters and saying, I'm calling the police and they're going to come here and shoot you. And then months later, that happened for real and was in the news, and when it happened, it was like, oh, because you hear that, I think as a person with some white privilege, you hear that and you think like, geez, that was pretty, that woman seems pretty crazy. And it's like, yeah, well, if it's crazy, it's crazy IRL because it's happening.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole truth is stranger than fiction in some respects. And that's where I loved, as you watch this story go to a certain point and you think it's all going to be good, then it goes off the rails. And then again, where she just breaks the fourth wall and again, calls the writers on stuff, then goes to talk to Kevin, complete with baseball cap and then says like, look, it really are we going to go down the whole, he gets superpowers? Like Todd's villainy has nothing to do with that. Like he's toxic, like that's villainous enough. Like and that idea that
when he injected himself with the blood,
brilliant because it was that calling all this stuff out and like you say, there's that thing where in the same way that you would say, well, isn't this a little over the top? She was doing that based on on one level, yes, this is over the top, but at the same time, like I said, from 55 years on the planet as a woman, the only thing that's really different in the show is the fact that, yes, there are superheroes, green people, superpowers, that kind of thing. But the behaviors are really there. And there are far more Todds walking the planet. And the dude is a toxic villain. There's plenty of those toxic villains out there. The last thing they need is, gamma radiation enhancement. Because when you think about the fact that she was to get that, first of all, there's that whole network that they've set up. The fact that it was so infiltrated to be able to, again, have somebody go and date her on an app, do this, do that, gaslight her into believing all these other kinds of things to then turn around and again, dox her, do all this other stuff. Like, again, that is not unusual. Revenge porn exists. All of these other things exist, and they exist in these weird life-altering ways. And the only thing that was different was that Jen was able to break the fourth wall. And in a sense, yes, she's calling out heaven and this constructed universe and blah, 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 blah. But that's in a sense also calling out. So there's the MCU like call out in terms of like the CGI and when are we, certain kinds of things there and fight scenes and daddy issues. And that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But, put a pin in that one. But then also at the same time, this idea of no, the number of times as a woman, you just want to be able to say to society, like, just like, hold on, stop. This is flipping ridiculous. And I don't know how many folks, are familiar with Cassandra from Greek mythology. So she's the one that was, given the ability to 100% accurate prophecies, but the curse is that she will never be believed. So it relates to the Trojan War. So here's this poor woman with like, don't do the thing. Oh, there she is going off again. And then the thing happens and gee, how did we all get here? And Cassandra's like pulling her hair out going like, I warned you like 57 times. And so there's been tons of stuff here. We just had a recent election. So we had She-Hulk coming out. We had a civic election here where we watched a former mayor who was not only toxic in his time in office, but left halfway through a term and then not even allegations. Like this was stuff that when it came out in the media, you're like, this wasn't some sort of little once-off thing like this story. First of all, you were scrolling and you're just like, holy crap, did they put War and Peace on like my, this one article? And oh my God, like how much time did legal have to take a look at this? So it wasn't thrown out there, in any kind of spurious fashion. But you watch people double down and back this person. And I remember, and the part for me is as somebody that has survived both domestic violence, but also narcissistic abuse and physical abuse from my father, as well as other people. And some of these people who are now backing this abuser are the people that, were like by my side and, do I need to do a thing? Do you have a lawyer? And it was this. And I remember making a post that basically said, like, what is it that those of us as survivors have to do to get our supposed allies, supporters, to stop supporting other abusers? Like, just because this person didn't abuse me doesn't mean that they're okay. And that, and so it was that weird thing. So to see Jen do that and be able to alter the storyline, you're like, oh my God, like that's the fantasy. That's the thing, because you get so tired of beating your head into a wall. And again, I had somebody basically go rant and try to dox me and throw stuff into like not just my DMs, but other friends. So like that stuff is out there. And they also allege to be, this type of person and that type of a person. And it's like, well, if you can't put your profile and a real name on there, I don't know who you are, but I'm not listening to you. But so what Jen is describing is not like, it's not as over the top as some of us would like to, believe it is. I wish it was somebody, putting something on steroids as opposed to reality.
Man. Yeah. And that's the thing. Yeah, that's totally true. Is when you can choose to turn it off and ignore it and not have it be a thing, man, when you have that, well, I mean, privilege, that's what privilege is, right? And so somebody who's like, oh, I'm white, so I don't have to pay attention to racism if I don't want to. I'm a man, I don't really have to pay that much attention to sexism unless I choose to. And then, so with that option, oftentimes, unfortunately, comes the denial and the chance to say, well, I feel better living in a world where that, quote, doesn't happen, so therefore I'm going to pretend I'm in that world. And anymore, I think with things coming out, I believe that there's at least a few more people that are hearing the stories from people when they come out and are listening and that go, yeah, okay, you know what? That's a good point. At least with younger people, I see that a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things here, was to see the generational divide, and that the number of folks that were, again, younger, going, I don't know who he, okay, yeah, I recognize this name from, back, or I don't recognize it. But if I have any recognition, it's more of the, like that historical, learned it in the civics class kind of thing. But once that story came out, I was like, whoa. And yeah, so there's that whole thing about what some people can get away with. So that's what I actually loved about her doing that, was it was, again, as she was calling out all of these other things and dealing with these things that so many of us, again, deal with just without, all the other gamma, radiation related things that make it, the fiction that it is. It was like, yeah, she wasn't just calling out Kevin and the MCU. There was a societal call out there that was kind of nice. And again, very She-Hulk. And and even the fact too, that it's like that we're Hulks. That's what we do. We smash. And then throwing in the Matt Murdock part of that, because again, that was part of it, because I remember watching the fanboys where it's people, I'm just hanging out, I'm just hanging around waiting for Daredevil. When is Daredevil showing up? Daredevil. Oh, Daredevil got laid. And you're like, oh, well, suddenly this is not good. Don't you realize like this is not so she's a slut, but
or even the worst
playboy. But what? And you're like, you don't realize. And so the fact that, that she put the, and sometimes I smash Matt Murdock out there, like, you don't realize, like, yeah.
Right.
She wasn't,
that's a poke back at.
She wasn't on the receiving end of this. She was an active agent. And if anything, this is about, she got Matt Murdock.
Or even worse, when a few people out there saying like, oh man, what a corruption to Matt Murdock. He's a good Catholic boy. And it's like, well, hold on. Being Catholic is a big part of Daredevil's backstory, but he's not a good Catholic boy.
Have you been paying attention?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, hey, tell everybody what's going on at speak-up.co, if I said your website right.
Ooh, well, there's some overhauls going on. As you know, in my previous life, I used to be a university educator. So I am doing some wonderful work with 2 different groups of student interns. So I am hoping by mid-December to have the website relaunched and have some of the glitches that were happening in the back end of the membership site all sorted out. So,
it sure is a good looking website, though.
What's that?
I mean, as far as like every time I've looked at it, you're like, do you still have the landing page with the Iron Man chest light thing? I don't know if you still have.
Oh, yeah, the arc reactor. Well,
yeah,
but
the arc reactor. That was the word I was
love the arc reactor, but it was on every page and it was slowing it down. So I've got some wonderful UI UX students doing that, and then they are. In Ontario and Kenya, one of the students is actually. So this is all remote. So booking those meetings is always fun.
Yes.
And then
I've had some of those episodes with
doing
people in different parts of the world.
That's as an educator, the idea of being able to give them, let them do some practicum work, and they're excited about it. So doing that, and like I said, speaking at the tech conference. So there's always stuff going on. Again, there'll be the relaunch and the rebrand. Not a full rebrand, but more of the relaunch of the membership website, and hopefully some more new things to announce on the horizon. And you and I need to get our act together on that book.
That's right. Yes.
More on that later. There's a there. We're putting out the Greg for
put out a little, exactly.
Future reference.
Little hidden thing. Yeah, we're working on something. So we're working on something as well.
And I guess the other thing too, and this is the throwback to the what we were just talking about. I love the fact, and this is why Hulks are some of my favorite, was that opening episode. Yes, Bruce may have been trying to mansplain hulking, but he did make one more part of my program canon when he sat down with dialectical behavior therapy, because I'm like, I've been using Hulk for DBT right from
when's the last time you heard DBT referenced in any media that's just fictional media?
Yeah.
That was fantastic.
So developing that, and I think I'm going to clearly be plugging that a little bit more, because it just seems that, every other thing, Bruce says a thing that is like, oh, and that part of my program is now canon. Oh, and that part of my program. So I love me my Hulks.
Well, I'm gonna plug, as we're on our way out. I want to plug 2 places you can go for non-toxic fandom. And on Facebook, you can find, there's a group I've plugged before on here called Paprika. And I may have mentioned this before as well, but it's the Great Geek Refuge. And both of these have attending podcasts. The Paprika Reviews is a lot of movie reviews and some good movie shows. The Great Geek Refuge has a few different podcasts that you can find under that name. And they even have one of the things they have is their theme song talks about being anti-gatekeeping and no toxicity. So they even have right up front, they hit you. And Mike Lunsford, who's one of the admins there, has put it out there that he's like, if I catch you using M, she, you, or the word, if I catch you using that non-ironically on the page, you're just gone. That's a one offense thing. You are gone.
Yeah. There's no 3 strikes, you're out. This is don't let the door hit your butt.
Right, exactly. This is 1 strike.
And that's more about a don't dirty my door.
So that's there's a couple places that people want to look for a place that is non-toxic and also very supportive, very kind and nice people that I find. And the interesting thing, you can really see how debate can be fun if it's with people who are caring and also non-toxic. So, people will debate all day long on there, but again, you get the ban hammer fall down on you if you're toxic or negative. That's
awesome. So, thank you for resharing that, because I got to catch up on that.
Yeah. I'll send you. I should send you invites. I'm in both groups. So although they're for anyone can join them, but. So there's that. And then, I'll just say, as far as people getting, we're talking about websites, you can always hop on over to patreon.com/brokenbrain if you'd like to get involved with the program. There's more and more bonus things in the works that are coming. Got some, doing some things that have to do with media, and then also doing some article reviews and reviews of mental health resources out there. About to drop a little review about 988, which is a new suicide hotline in the United States. I don't know if that's in Canada, but at least in the US, that's something that's becoming. You can hit 3 numbers and be directed to, instead of having to write down or look up the National Suicide Hotline, which, if you're super suicidal, not always, and depressed, not always motivated to look up a hotline where someone's going to, Yeah,
exactly. Like things, and again, and that's also one of those things that it makes life easy. But again, having been in government, the infrastructure and the idea of how do you consistently deliver something and what is that doing to your own system? So it's a challenge for the system on a number of fronts, but if it's going to save lives, that's what we need to do. And that's where we need to have those resources, because as much as we can keep doing other things, you still have to have it there.
Absolutely.
Because but again, we need to be doing more preemptive, more educational, more things where it's not about us and them in terms of those of us with diagnoses. It's not the mental health programs, and that's again what I deliver. When you bring them into the workplace, it's not about do these things to keep yourself from becoming someone with, a mental health issue. It's like we all have mental health. We all, and some of us, again, using the superpower reference, some days you never know if you're going to be in the car accident, get the, inadvertent blood transfusion and be the superhero the next day. So we're all a day away from it. So better to have a positive mindset and understanding of those who already live with those powers, because makes you a better ally, and you never know if one day you're going to help out.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.